And in the wake of all of this, Republican Senator Tim Scott is calling on Congress to pass anti-lynching legislation. He tweeted this late yesterday. Every single time the accusers pour in, he looked suspicious. We thought he was committing a crime. The fact remains, Ahmaud Arbery was hunted down from a pickup truck and murdered in cold blood. My heart breaks for his family, and justice must be served. That again from Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina. I want to bring in Kristen Clark now, President and Executive Director of the National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Good to see you today. Thank you for your time and your expertise. A couple of just beginning questions. Our reporter just said it was 74 days before we saw any movement in this case. Why is that?
You know, the case first went to a local prosecutor who appropriately identified a conflict of interest. Gregory McMichael is somebody who worked literally for the department that she leads. The case then went to a second prosecutor who did not immediately disclose potential conflicts of interest. Those were disclosed publicly, but a lot of time was lost while the case remained in his hands before being passed off to a third prosecutor. No doubt there have been missteps. My hope is, particularly for the family of Mr. Arbery, that the interest of justice will now be served, that we should have some confidence and faith in the fact that two men have been arrested. There may be more arrests to come, but for no doubt, justice delayed is justice denied for a family that is really grueling over the loss of their son.
Yeah, you know, Kristen, you have looked at so many of these cases. You've been in law your whole adult life, from everything I've read about you, and led in so many different areas of civil rights. Is there a hate crimes law in Georgia today?
You know, Georgia is one of the states that does not have strong hate crimes protections on its book. But we do have the Matthew Shepard. We do have the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act at the federal level. Right. And I do think at some point there is need for a discussion about whether Georgia should do more to enhance laws where there is evidence that crimes were committed that were racially motivated. But two men have been arrested and charged with murder and with aggravated assault. And we should let the justice system play out at this point to see what happens. There's been a loss of life, and these two men should be brought to account.
One last question for you, and it has to do with what Senator Tim Scott, a Republican from South Carolina, was tweeting about last night, and it's anti-lynching legislation. Now, I was looking at some of the clapbacks on Twitter, the responses, and people were kind of in disbelief that that actually hadn't happened. I remember in February of 2020, just this year, when that was being looked at, that bill. Just the latest on what you know about anti-lynching laws in America, where we are.
Yeah, my organization, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, worked very hard on that bill, the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, and it was historic when passed by the House at the end of February. This bill passed after decades upon decades of efforts that were unsuccessful previously to get Congress to declare that lynching is a federal crime. Sadly, the bill has stalled in the Senate. Historic bipartisan passage in the House, but we need the Senate now to finally pass that important law that was championed by Senator Scott, along with Senator Harris and Booker, and then it should be signed into law by President Trump. It would go a long way in closing a dark chapter in our nation's history, one in which we've seen decades of lynchings and racial violence, but also a period in which Congress had not taken action to declare that these crimes are a federal offense. My hope is that with the death of Mr. Arbery, tragic as it is, that it reignites a movement around that important law, and that will get the Senate to finally act, move, and sign that bill, have the president sign that bill into law.
Kristen Clark, thank you for helping us to look at this case that's playing out in Georgia. Ahmaud Arbery, it would have been his 26th birthday today. Appreciate your legal expertise and your time.
Thank you for having me.